Right now, as America celebrates its 250th anniversary, the 50 stars on our flag feel permanent, immutable. But if just 2 votes had gone differently in the summer of 1785, the American map would look completely unrecognizable today. Long before anyone debated a modern 51st state, a rogue territory seceded, weaponized a barter economy of animal pelts, and fought a bloody civil war just to join the Union. Its name was Franklin, and this is a tragic story of how a mix of Western defiance, primitive currency, and a high-stakes Spanish betrayal wiped them off the map forever. The abandoned frontier. The ink was barely dry on the Treaty of Paris when the cracks in the new American Republic began to show. While the elite merchants of the Atlantic coast celebrated their hard-won victory over the British crown, a vastly different reality was unfolding across the rugged peaks of the Appalachian Mountains. There, tens of thousands of frontier pioneers quickly realized that their own government viewed them not as cherished citizens, but as an expensive financial liability. North Carolina was drowning in staggering post-war debt and desperate to escape the heavy federal taxes imposed by the Continental Congress during the deep economic recession. Looking for a convenient sacrificial lamb, the state legislature eyed its Western Mountain Territory as an ideal political bargaining chip. In a sudden and calculated move in April 1784, North Carolina abruptly voted to cede nearly 30 million acres of its western land directly to the federal government. With the stroke of a pen, the state politicians effectively drew a line right down the jagged spine of the Blue Ridge Mountains, slicing the state in half. By handing this territory over to a weak central Congress, North Carolina completely cut ties with the frontier settlements, instantly abandoning thousands of loyal pioneers to survive entirely on their own in the dangerous wilderness. The birth of a rogue republic. This sudden abandonment plunged the mountain settlers into a terrifying legal limbo, rendering them completely stateless overnight. The British Army had been defeated, North Carolina had officially cast them aside, and the gridlocked Continental Congress stubbornly refused to accept a massive land transfer. This left thousands of isolated pioneers stranded in a lawless wilderness, entirely surrounded by hostile forces and lacking any recognized government. They were suddenly left without military protection against aggressive native tribes, without local courts to resolve land disputes, and without any foundational legal system to maintain basic societal order. Realizing that help would never come from the East, the resilient pioneers decided that they had to take matters into their own hands to survive. Therefore, on August 23, 1784, a group of determined delegates representing 3 distinct western counties named Washington, Sullivan, and Greene assembled in the frontier town of Jonesboro. Faced with total anarchy, these men staged an unprecedented and highly dangerous political gamble. They boldly voted to secede from North Carolina entirely and unanimously declared themselves to be an independent, self-governing commonwealth. They took control of their own destiny, establishing an unrecognized nation right in the rugged heart of the expanding American continent. Their bold rebellion marked the true inception of a brave new territorial state born Toda. Why? The Benjamin Franklin Gambit. The newborn rogue territory now possessed a functioning legislative body, but suffered from a fatal flaw. It had absolutely zero domestic or international legitimacy. To survive the looming political storm, the frontier leaders desperately needed to convince the fragile United States government that they were not dangerous insurrectionists or treasonous rebels. This urgent necessity led directly to a highly calculated and clever political naming strategy designed specifically to flatter America's most famous and influential founding father. The breakaway territory had originally chosen the poetic name of Franklin, which translated literally to the land of free men. However, growing increasingly desperate for powerful allies within the Continental Congress, the frontier leadership officially changed the name of their state to Franklin. Their newly elected governor, a charismatic Indian fighter named John Sevier, penned a desperate letter directly to Benjamin Franklin himself. Sevier explicitly offered to name the state permanently in his honor if the venerable statesman would champion their cause in the capital. But this grand gamble ultimately failed to secure the crucial endorsement they required. Benjamin Franklin sent back a polite but strictly non-committal written response that offered kind words but zero political assistance, leaving the young republic completely isolated. This devastating diplomatic rejection forced the vulnerable pioneers to confront their severe challenges. 1. The currency of pelts and whiskey. A wave of sudden panic swept through the region when North Carolina politicians realized their massive geopolitical error. They quickly revoked the original land cession and immediately cut off all official United States currency supply lines, aiming to completely starve out the Western Rebellion through total economic strangulation. Completely denied any access to scarce gold and silver coins, the newborn state of Franklin faced an immediate and catastrophic economic collapse. To combat this financial warfare, the resilient Franklin legislature passed a highly unusual and creative legal framework that officially established a statewide barter economy. They passed specific laws designating common frontier goods as legitimate, state-regulated currency to keep the government functioning. The exact financial data from these archives reveals a fascinating economic reality. The governor's annual salary was fixed at exactly 1,000 deer skins, while members of the local legislature received 3 raccoon skins for every day of service. Furthermore, clean beaver pelts were legally utilized to pay off mounting public debts, and even distilled rye whiskey was assigned a fixed monetary value for tax payments. This bizarre primitive financial system successfully kept the unrecognized republic afloat, proving that the defiant pioneers could sustain a functioning nation without ever using a single piece of standard American coin during this entire historical era. 2 votes short of history. Armed with functioning currency and a freshly drafted constitution, the Republic of Franklin finally made its official, high-stakes bid to join the United States as the 14th state, coming agonizingly close to permanently altering the American flag. In May 1785, Governor John Sevier confidently submitted a formal petition for statehood directly to the Continental Congress. However, the fateful vote had to take place under the rigid rules of the Articles of Confederation, which required a strict 2/3 majority of 9 states to admit any new territory into the Union. The future of the entire western frontier hung on a terrifying knife edge as the state delegations cast their ballots. Ultimately, Franklin managed to win a clear and definitive majority, securing 7 votes from the states present. But because the stringent constitutional threshold required 9, the rogue republic fell exactly 2 votes short of entering history, instantly plunging the territory right back into total legal limbo. This narrow defeat was carefully engineered by powerful eastern states like Virginia and North Carolina, who aggressively blocked the petition out of an intense fear that recognizing Franklin would trigger a dangerous cascade of similar pioneer rebellions across the continent. This devastating federal rejection set the stage for a dangerous internal conflict within the isolated mountain territory. The Shadow Government War. Bitterly rejected by Congress but stubbornly refusing to dissolve, the defiant state of Franklin immediately entered a dark and surreal phase of total administrative anarchy. Over the next 2 years, the very concept of local law turned completely upside down as a bizarre shadow government war consumed the valleys. Realizing that the rebellion was not fading away, North Carolina passed aggressive new laws to forcefully reclaim the territory, appointing their own parallel judges, sheriffs, and tax collectors to the exact same region. However, the fiercely loyal citizens of Franklin flatly refused to recognize these eastern authorities, actively maintaining their own separate courts and competing public officials. This created an unprecedented geographical absurdity, where the exact same piece of land had 2 rival governments operating simultaneously over the same population. Neighbors who had once fought together against the British were suddenly forced to choose sides in a confusing bureaucratic nightmare. Official records from this chaotic era show that towns frequently collapsed into violence, with competing factions physically fighting in the streets over who possessed the legal right to collect taxes or enforce judicial rulings, utterly shattering any remaining illusion of American brotherhood as a severe domestic crisis steadily intensified toward a devastating and full-scale civil war between these 2 fiercely uncompromising local frontier factions themselves. The Battle of Neighbors. The administrative Cold War finally shattered into bloody violence, marking the tragic historical moment when American veterans of the Revolution turned their weapons on one another in the freezing snow. The flashpoint occurred when a loyalist North Carolina sheriff executed a court order to seize the personal property and slaves of Franklin's defiant governor, John Sevier, to cover overdue back taxes. Sevier furiously refused to let his executive authority be undermined by an eastern state. In February 1788, Sevier gathered a dedicated militia of 150 men and marched out to lay siege to the Loyalist farm belonging to Jonathan Tipton. This aggressive action triggered the first and only direct military engagement of the entire conflict, forever remembered as the Battle of Franklin. As a heavy winter blizzard raged around them, former wartime allies desperately traded musket fire across the frozen fields. The brief but tragic skirmish concluded with devastating casualty data. 3 men lay dead in the snow, and several others were severely wounded. This small, heartbreaking battle fundamentally exposed the dark, internal trauma of the frontier, proving that the dream of a separate state had ultimately cost the lives of the very patriots who had fought to build it from the very ground up during those early, turbulent, foundational pioneer years. The Spanish treason and total erasure, defeated, completely bankrupt, and actively hunted by authorities, the increasingly desperate leader Franklin made a dangerous secret deal with America's greatest foreign rival, sealing the state's ultimate doom. Facing total institutional collapse, John Sevier reached out to the Spanish governor in New Orleans, boldly offering to swear official allegiance to the King of Spain in exchange for immediate financial loans and powerful military protection. However, the United States government quickly intercepted this high-stakes plot, instantly viewing the secret negotiations as outright treason against the fragile Union. The revelation fractured the remaining pioneer movement from within. Sevier was promptly arrested by state forces. The independent structure of Franklin permanently collapsed, and the disputed territory was quietly reabsorbed back into the borders of North Carolina. Years later, the same mountain land was transitioned to become the eastern backbone of the new state of Tennessee. This administrative rearrangement completely erased the name of Franklin from the official map of North American history. The unique 14-state vanished entirely, leaving behind only scattered archival documents and a haunting memory of an abandoned people whose desperate star was forever stripped away from the American flag before it could ever be truly born into this great nation we know and celebrate throughout the country across the land right here today.